there are three basic psychic temperaments. And these temperaments are a result of the sensitivity that our inner senses have to particular kinds of experience, non-physical experience. And what I found is that in non-physical reality, you can say that everything is energy, information, and consciousness. So those are the three basic principles, and everybody is sensitive to at least one of those. And that's the basis for each person's psychic temperament. And there are combinations also of two of each of these, and then there's also people who have developed all three. So I like to think of the analogy of light, like what we think about in physical terms, in physics. It is said to behave like a particle under some circumstances and like a wave under other circumstances. You could say that the waveform is the equivalent of what I'm talking about when I talk about energy. You could say that a particle, which is an individual byte of information, that refers to the information aspect. And you could say that the consciousness aspect is ignored by contemporary science. But it's interesting to speculate that light itself may have a consciousness as well as energy and information. So that's just a way in to thinking about how these terms are related to science. In terms of our own inner sense experience, the people who are sensitive to energy tend to be what I call the mystic type. They are often very oriented towards truth. They seek truth. They want to experience some kind of connection to a higher level of being. They don't necessarily see that higher level of being as a person. It might be an abstract being. It might be the idea of some kind of consciousness that embraces non-duality, something like that. And they're not interested in beings per se or levels of being like planes and so on. They want to go in terms of meditation, out in terms of, out of body or something like that, and then up, to transcend this reality. And all of this is an energetic experience, which means that it doesn't necessarily have an information content. It's just experienced as the truth. And the people who operate this way are often very uncomfortable with imagery. It's hard for them to use it, or they don't trust it, because they recognize that imagery is a kind of secondary experience that's added on to the energetic experience of the truth. And the same thing is true of beings. Conscious beings are always limited by their viewpoint. Their viewpoint might be low, it might be medium, it might be high, but it's always limited. Only the absolute, so to speak, is an unlimited point of view. So the mystics are only really interested in relating to that absolute. My personal belief is that the Theosophical Society seems to attract a lot of the mystical types. And so the idea of the truth and a tendency to downplay imagery or relationships with beings is a typical presentation and has been since the beginning. So the second type is the information type, and this is the type that I happen to be. So I teach from the information standpoint, and then I try to support people who are from the other two standpoints, because I've recognized over the years that it's difficult sometimes for people who are not oriented towards imagery and information to understand how to do the practices. So the people who deal with information, I call them clairvoyants. They have a clear vision of what it is that they're perceiving. For them, inner sense information naturally shows up that way. In the Theosophical tradition, Leadbeater is one who deals with information. So when you read any of his books, it's always about what the aura looks like, what color it is, what the chakras look like, if he's on another realm, what the beings look like, how they clothe themselves, if that's a part of the way that they present themselves. And the challenge or the limitation of people who deal with information is they're not always aware of the truth content of what they're saying, and they're not able to interpret what they experience, and they often take it literally. So an example might be someone who has had a near-death experience and come back seeing that there's a heaven and it's a place like a city and the roads are paved with gold. And for that person, heaven is a place, there are roads, and the roads are paved with gold, real gold. Now, someone who's also got the energy component can perceive that behind that there's another reality. And the other reality is whatever your pathway through the afterlife is, it'll appear to you as a road, and the one that's right for you will appear to you as brighter than, or lighter than, or more golden, somehow more valuable. The idea for people who have the information aspect strongest, the clairvoyance, is to make sure they're always open to interpreting what they're experiencing so that they can get to the truth of it. So the third type is the consciousness type, and in this type, the most important thing is the relationship that you have with other beings. And that relationship is felt as an opening of the heart and a sense of connection. And the challenge of having that one is you don't always know what it is that you're opening your heart to. You might or might not be safe in doing that. And this was one of the points that Madame Blavatsky was making early in the history of the Theosophical Society about spiritualism. The way I put it, which I hope isn't too detrimental to the idea of spiritualism, is, everybody's your grandma. You go into that place where your heart is open, you have a connection with spirit of some kind, and because you had a deep connection with your grandma, maybe more than your parents, you'll perceive the being that's in touch with you as your grandma. And it might actually be, if that is your deceased grandmother. But you don't always know, and Madame Blavatsky's point was we need to inquire into these things to make sure that what we're perceiving is how it's presenting itself or how we're interpreting it. So again, for the people who are operating from this relational standpoint, there is a tendency also, just like the information people, not always to be deeply connected to the truth aspect. And that's not to say that they're misleading other people or they're misleading themselves, but they have a less complete perception. So the idea is, depending on your type, adding at least one other or maybe both in terms of your own spiritual development. And this is the approach that I take to teaching.